Did that title get your attention? I sure hope so. I'm Kurt Johnson from Fresh Air Ventilation Systems, and I've taken some time to put together this video to help inform you of the changes that have taken over the last 25 to 30 years. Whether you live in an existing house or are building a new tight energy efficient house, the issue of indoor air pollution has been and will continue to be a big problem. I'm going to discuss the trends that have taken place, the health consequences that we have suffered, and then we will look at two strategies to deal with this problem. Other countries have been down this road, and we can learn from their advances. Please take time to consider all that's here, for the health of you and your family are at stake. Thank you for stopping by.
So the three converging trends are changes in construction, chemicals and other pollutants coming in, and us becoming couch potatoes. Old houses leaked a lot of air naturally, and fireplaces and wood stoves, though pollutant sources, actually help move air out and in. In the 40s and 50s, post-war housing increased demand. New products like plywood, pressboard, and sheetrock started some of the changes. Wall-to-wall carpeting with the introduction of nylon and olefin began to become popular in the late 50s and on into the 60s and 70s. Some improvements were made, but not significantly different. In 1973, with the oil embargo, the rising cost of heating, which peaked in 1980, changed construction. Construction began to focus on keeping warm air in and cold air out. Many advances became common building practices. Oriented strand board, or otherwise known as OSB, was introduced and quickly became the sheathing of choice, passing plywood in the early 80s. These panels are made of wood chips and glues and resins, along with 2x6 construction with fiberglass in the walls and ceiling, double pane windows, insulating around windows with fiberglass also became the norm. Previous ventilation standards of 15 cubic feet of air a minute per person were reduced to 5. No major changes in this country were made after these because the price of oil dropped back down. Not so in other countries where 2 to 3 times higher energy costs continued to fuel building efficiencies. Also in the late 70s, with the introduction of the personal computer and TV-based video games, the consumers' habits began to change. This had a significant impact on how we spend our leisure hours. So the second trend, based on a study done in 2001, showed Americans spend 89% of our time indoors. We are the only country that spends more time in our cars than outside. So for every 1 hour of breathing fresh outside air, we spend 18 hours rebreathing polluted inside air. The third trend is the demand for ease of life. In the 50s and 60s, there was a huge demand for products that made life easier and more luxurious. The global production of synthetic organic chemicals, otherwise known as SOCs, greatly increased, and starting around 1970, jumped in the 80s and 90s. It is difficult to find a house today that does not have a closet or shelf that looks like the photo in this slide. This was a big change in housing. Suddenly they were full of SOCs. Okay, so what are some of the pollutant sources? Our basic building materials are largely made with glued together wood. OSB is used in flooring, wall and roof sheathing, and leak chemicals including formaldehyde into the air. Paints and other wall coverings also off-gas chemicals, and floor coverings like vinyl flooring not only are made with glues, but are also glued to the floor. Kitchen and bathroom cabinets are largely made from composite woods, which also off-gas chemicals. The new furniture smell? Yep, it's a sure sign that chemicals are being released into the air. And what are some of the other sources? How about the spray products for personal care and cleaning? These atomize chemicals directly into the air, and cleaning chemicals contain many known carcinogens. Our combustion appliances release combustion gases directly into the air where they can accumulate. 500 deaths each year attributed to carbon monoxide poisoning. Cooking also releases particulates and gases into the air. Everyone knows the dangers of cigarette smoke and secondhand smoke. But what about our friends? Not only do they bring in pet dander, but bacteria from feces and urine and chemicals to control fleas and ticks. New computers have shown to release 48 known toxic chemicals, and their associated printers with inks and toners are also pollution generators. Dishwashers with their high heat have been shown to be great strippers of chemicals off of our plastic containers and produce very high levels of chloroform, toluene, and other chemicals that I cannot pronounce. Mothballs and dry clean clothes both release chemicals into our closets. And how many homes nowadays use dryer sheets, putting chemicals directly onto our clothes to help them smell fresh? Then we put these clothes on our bodies. Moisture accumulation has become a big problem with the associated mold growth. Mold has been shown to aggravate and possibly cause asthma. According to the EPA, microscopic dust mites in bedrooms have been shown to cause 1/3 of 14 million doctor visits each year. You cannot see them, and they flourish in our bedrooms, feeding on dead skin cells. And then to cover up the bad smells, we bring in air fresheners and scented candles. Both of these emit particulates and chemicals known as VOCs, volatile organic compounds, into our air. VOCs are known carcinogens and are a big problem for us. And then carpeting. Not only is carpeting made with glues and other chemicals, but carpeting has been shown to be a great place to catch and keep other chemicals and particulates. One study of Midwestern homes back in the mid-90s showed 25% of the homes still had traces of DDT in the carpet 20 years after DDT was banned. These are just some of the pollutant sources in our homes. So what happened in the 80s and 90s? Sick building syndrome. 30% of new or remodeled buildings have excessive complaints. At the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, a percentage of all complaints relating to indoor air quality, in 1978, only 0.5% related to indoor air quality. Within only 12 years, that number dramatically increased to 52%. And in that same time frame, there was a dramatic increase in respiratory disease. More bad news. Studies link indoor air pollution to asthma. Courts are awarding multi-million dollars in toxic mold cases, and programs are identifying victims of radon-related cancer. In two of the most recent findings, in Europe, scientists have found a baffling link between vinyl flooring, indoor air contaminants, and the cause of autism. And also, the International Agency for Research on Cancer and the World Health Organization have both concluded that 80% of all cancers are attributed to environmental rather than genetic factors, including exposure to carcinogenic chemicals, many of which are found in household cleaning products. The Surgeon General has said asthma has become a national epidemic. In 1980, we had 6.8 million cases of it. That number jumped by 1996 to 14.6 million and has continued to rise to the point where in 2005 we have 22.2 million cases. Asthma deaths also have increased. From 1977, they almost tripled by 1998, and asthma has become the leading cause of death in young children. The household that has a child with asthma spends between 5.5% and 14.5% of the family's income to treat that asthmatic child. In a 2005 Surgeon General advisory, millions of homes and apartments and 1 in 5 schools have indoor air quality problems. He also stated that 7.7% of school-aged children have asthma, and this causes an approximate 14 million missed school days each year. That trend has continued, and currently we have 8.9% of children with asthma, and Maine has the highest rate in the United States, with a rate of 10% of adults and 10.7% of children. In cleaning chemical studies in Europe, they found some interesting results. European women using spray cleaners 4 days a week were more than twice as likely to have asthma, and women working in domestic cleaning had a 46 to 109% more likelihood to develop asthma. Surgeon General's warning, radon causes lung cancer. According to the EPA, each year over 20,000 people die from lung cancer caused by radon. 1 in 15 homes have high radon levels at or above 4 picocuries per liter. Cancer risk at 4 picocuries per liter is 1 in 44. And in Maine, the average house is at or above 4 picocuries per liter. Mold and other particulates. 60,000 deaths each year are caused by particulate matter, according to the American Heart Association. And exposure to air pollution contributes to the development of cardiovascular diseases such as heart disease and stroke. So does this concern you? If so, what can you do? So there are 2 effective strategies: source control and ventilation. Limit the pollutants from coming in and remove the ones that do get in. In this presentation, we're going to talk about ventilation. Ventilation, natural versus mechanical. So we need to start thinking about our house as a system. There are 2 main driving forces of air: high pressure to low pressure, and warm air rises, cold air drops. This is known as stack effect. And a very important principle: air out is always equal to air in. Natural, wind and stack effect, and mechanical. When the wind blows against your house, one side becomes high pressure, the other side becomes low pressure. And if there are any cracks in the house, air will move through the house. Stack effect will create high pressure, the top part of the house, as warm air rises, pushing that air out, and cooler air will leak back in lower on in the house. Mechanical will be a fan blowing air out of the house, relying on air pushing back in to replace it. So what can be trusted to work consistently? Natural ventilation. Wind is inconsistent. Winter versus summer. In the wintertime, stack effect has a great effect pushing upwards. In the summertime, it's almost non-existent. You have no control. If the wind blows a lot, you'll get a lot of air exchange. If the wind doesn't blow, you'll have little or none. You have 100% heat loss. Cool air coming in needs to be reheated. In a tight house, we have few holes, and where are they? Mechanical ventilation, airflow is controllable. Properly designed will vent every room. And with heat recovery, we can capture 95% of the heat from the exhaust air. So we can see that mechanical ventilation is superior, but which one? There are 2 types: exhaust only versus balance. Exhaust only has been used for years in bathrooms and kitchens. But which one is really effective when it comes to complete ventilation of the entire house? Does it remove the pollutants from all rooms? So here's a very important question. What room do you spend the most time in, and your children? Is it the kitchen? Maybe it's the bathroom. How about the living room? I don't think so. What about the man cave? Looks pretty nice, but probably not. I think it's reasonable to say that most people spend at least a third of their day sleeping at night in their bedroom. Children more, and infants probably the most. According to the American Lung Association, bedtime is anything but pleasant for people with allergies and asthma, since that's very often the time when symptoms worsen. I believe it's the most polluted room that we spend any amount of time in, and the following information may prove that out. In a recent study in California, they found formaldehyde in baby cribs. Many baby nursery furnishings emit formaldehyde. A baby sleeping in a nursery furnished with a high-emission crib and changing table may face an increased risk of developing allergies and/or asthma. Formaldehyde exposure can cause cancer in the long term in as little as 2 parts per billion. 6 of the tested furnishings released enough formaldehyde to contaminate an entire home with levels of formaldehyde greater than this threshold. This is just one of the many house components releasing formaldehyde and other chemicals. In another study, they looked at the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. They wanted to examine the relationship between room ventilation during sleep and the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. They used a fan and an open window during sleep, and what they found was an associated 72% reduction in SIDS risk. Pretty significant. So does exhaust only really work? Bath and kitchen fans have been used for many years, but do they really ventilate the bedrooms? Are they effective ventilating every room? So let's see. A fan typically in the bathroom or kitchen is turned on and blows air out of the house, relying on high pressure outside now to push into the cracks and open. We have no control of where that fresh air comes in. It's going to come in the easiest path and the biggest openings. One of the things shown in the California study is that these fans are not used properly. They also depressurize the building, which can lead to the problem of backdrafting flues and pulling in pollutants from areas that we may not want. They also have 100% heat loss. The warm air is blown out. Cold air comes back in. We have to reheat this. And if we're trying to conserve energy, to me this doesn't make sense. And they also can be noisy. Okay, so we know air moves from high pressure to low pressure. Since air out is replaced by air coming back in, so where does that air come back in? Is it the front door, the basement, the garage, an open flue, or another not in use vent? See, we really don't know. And then where does it go? It goes right to the low pressure in the bathroom or the kitchen. So the question is, how does this ventilate the bedroom and get fresh air in there? See, we really don't know, because every house is different. This method only hopes to ventilate the bedroom, but there is no direct control. This is really a hope-so method. Let's take a look at design and balance ventilation. It's a totally different principle than exhaust. We're going to ventilate all the room. We're going to have complete control of the airflow. Not only are we going to control the volume, but we're also going to control where that air flows. We're going to have heat recovery up to 95%, and we're going to recover that bath heat loss that an exhaust fan does not do. In the winter, we can control humidity by bringing in that drier outside air and getting rid of that moisture that wants to build up. It can be programmable, and with the new ECM motors, we can have electricity cost as low as $3 per month. There's two main types of ventilators: HRV or heat recovery ventilator, and an ERV energy recovery ventilator. HRVs recover up to 95% of the heat energy. They remove all moisture within the exhaust air, and they're good for colder climates with excess indoor humidity. ERVs also recover up to 95% of the heat energy, but they bounce moisture back in the direction of its source. They're good for warm, humid climates to keep the moisture outside, or in dry houses in the wintertime, they're good to keep some moisture in. They also have no condensation drain. How do air exchangers work? Let's see. Core with lots of surface area transfers heat. Heat moves from warm things to cold things, and with all that surface area, the warmth in the outbound air is easily transferred to the inbound air. The pollutants and moisture are removed, and the heat is recovered. For those people who want higher quality air, maybe there's some respiratory issues, we can have a combination of a ventilation unit and filtration. You can get the best quality air with a HEPA air exchanger. These will capture 99.97% of all dust and particulates, even those as small as 0.3 microns, about 1/50th of a human hair. They remove moisture and gases, and we also have other optional filters that we can put into a system. So all of the data we've looked at so far is based on the changes of the 70s and 80s. These are typically not very tight houses. What are the changes going to be as we move forward? The whole country has a green focus, and there's many programs and codes that are pushing for tighter and tighter houses. What will be the consequences? A study conducted by the California Resources Board may give us a little insight. 108 houses were studied, which were built between 2003 and 2007, and what they found is quite surprising. Can you believe 98% of the houses registered toxic levels of formaldehyde? And 2/3 of the ventilation systems did not even move the amount of air that ASHRAE requires.
House tightness has become a very controversial issue. Can you build a house too tight? How about this question? How do you build a house just loose enough to be healthy? A study done in 2003 looking at 70,000 U.S. homes shows that the natural ventilation rates have continued to decrease since the 50s. These homes in California's study had an average complete air exchange once every 4 hours, and these are polluted. The study stated that new California homes are generally being built tighter but not exceptionally tight like those found in colder climate regions. So how much ventilation is enough to stay healthy? This is an even harder question to answer, so let's look at some of the data. On the chart you see two of the pollutants, formaldehyde and acetaldehyde. They are charted based upon air exchange rate and the concentration levels. So now let's compare them to some ventilation codes around the world. I was told by a French gentleman that in France they require 1 air change per hour. When we look at Sweden, we see a half an air change per hour. And when we look at the US, we see ASHRAE at about 1/3 a change per hour. So the choice is really up to you and me. In our own homes, are we going to decide to ventilate? And then at what rate are we going to ventilate?
What are the signs and symptoms of indoor air pollution? This can be a little challenging with items like radon, which are colorless and odorless, and unless you test, you will not know. Others have effects similar to those of cold and other viral diseases: headaches, congestion, watery eyes, coughing, shortness of breath, dizziness, lethargy, fever, digestive problems. Moisture on your windows is a really good indicator that your ventilation is not good. Black mold around windows or low and high on the walls, high radon readings, poor combustion, flue backdrafts, and a chronic stale smell. And there are many others. I've had customers tell me that they feel sick all winter long, and it's not until summertime that they feel better. This would be a big indicator that their ventilation is not good.
So that's an awful lot to throw at you, I know. But in researching this, I found out that that's only a small portion of the data that exists of the health ramifications that we've suffered. Probably what concerns me most is the changes that we're currently making, and what are the health consequences of that going to be. So please consider this information. Check my sources. Go to the EPA's website, the American Lung Association. There's plenty of information out there. And if you're living in a polluted house and the signs are showing up, I would just encourage you to seek a solution. If we here at Fresh Air Ventilation Systems can be any benefit to you, please give us a call.